What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, we like it in Magic, and that's pretty much all the time I have for introductions today because I've already recorded this video. Only Audacity was picking up my webcam mic and not this microphone right here. That's the one you can actually hear me from. Turns out if it's tuned to the webcam mic, then I talk like this. You can't hear me at all. You can't hear anything I say. So, I have to re-record this video now. So, Wizards dumped like 35 plus cards on us today too. So there's a lot to go through. I really have no time to waste. Let's get to it. Now, most of the cards we got to see today were from Lorehold, the Boros faction in Strixhaven, but some weren't. So I want to look at that small selection of cardboard real quick, starting with Potion of Empowerment. Just 1 green mana for an instant. You gain 2 life. Target creature gets +X till end of turn, where X is the amount of life that you've gained this turn. That's not actually that bad. It should be pretty easy to turn this into a giant growth or something. We've already discussed maybe the mono-white life gain deck wants to be Selesnya after this set comes out, or possibly even Abzan if it's got the mana for it. Because, the new green-black Dean looks good in Selesnya life gain. But you might just not play the black part of that card. It's possible. But this just makes green-white look a little bit better if it's worth the slots, if it's worth the opportunity cost to include this card in your deck. But it might be. Green-white probably won't play Linden because it's going to be really difficult to actually play Linden in that deck. But still, if it does play Linden, it's really tempting to, because if you swing with like 2 or 3 dudes with a Linden out, then suddenly you gain enough life to turn this into like +4/+4, +5/+5 on your unblocked creature. And that's really, really good, actually. So I like this a fair amount, although I'm not too sure it's destined to see too much standard play. We also saw Go Blank today, and I actually really like this card. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards, then exile all cards from that player's graveyard. So what we have here is a Mind Rot that exiles at least 2 cards. This is basically target player exiles 2 cards from their hand. So it's strictly better than Mind Rot already, and it exiles the rest of the graveyard right along with those 2. So that's actually really good, I don't think it's better than like Elspeth's Nightmare, but it is better than Elspeth's Nightmare against certain decks. That said, with Elspeth's Nightmare, you get to pick the card that you take out of their hand. So that's good. So it's kind of a tough call. And while Elspeth's Nightmare is in the format, I'm pretty sure it's going to see the play because it's blinkable with Yorion and all that stuff. So these are definitely things you have to take into account. But maybe after rotation, this will be the way to exile graveyards because, it also comes with effective card advantage baked into it. That's pretty good. Your opponent gets rid of 2 cards, you get rid of 1 card. So again, it's effectively card advantage, pretty good against control decks. It doesn't just let your opponent, this is what I like about it. A lot of cards like this, your opponent just discards their flashbackable spell, or their escapable creature, or hey, I was going to reanimate that anyway, or oh, I have an Elspeth Conquers Death, that'll let me get that back later, whatever. This specifically doesn't do that. Your opponent can't just drop a Kroxa into the yard and escape it later because you're exiling everything. So I like that about this card too, and I think it's actually a little bit more playable than it looks on the surface. But let's go ahead and finish off the non-Lorehold stuff. Let's look at Campus Guide, Curate, and Bury in Books. Bury in Books is actually not too bad, but these are all just limited playable cards, I think, except for possibly Curate, but we'll get to it last. Bury in Books is 4 and a blue for an instant that costs 2 less to cast if it targets an attacking creature. You put target creature into its owner's library second from the top, so you get like a time ebb, a slightly better time ebb at instant speed if the creature's attacking. Same rate at least. And that's not bad. This kind of tempo is actually really good and extremely annoying, and in limited, this is just removal in blue decks, at least for a couple of turns. That kind of tempo can usually seal the deal. And it also gives you a couple of turns to draw a counterspell or untap with mana, so you have the counterspell when they go to cast the creature. In that way, it's better than a bounce effect. So these kind of top of library, and in this case, a couple of cards deep ability, the Plow Under ability, is actually usually better than people think it is, although I don't think this is going to see standard play. It's going to be a pretty annoying removal piece in limited, but we'll move on to Campus Guide. I like the flavor here. It's just 2 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature. And when it ETBs, you may search your library for a basic land, reveal it, shuffle your library, and put the card on top. That kind of sucks that it goes on top, not gonna lie. But at the same time, in like 3-color and beyond limited decks, this will help you fix your mana and get your drops, which is important too, without sacrificing board presence or anything. You get a body that'll often trade with something, but also make sure you hit your drops. So that's going to be important for some decks, whether they play a lot of lands or they play multiple colors. But again, probably just in limited. I really hate that it puts the card on top, but guaranteeing that you draw your 3rd land is actually not a terrible ability. Mark my words. But Curate is probably the most interesting looking of these for constructed playability. It is effectively a strategic planning that sacrifices one dig in order to get instant speed, and that's really good. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put any number of them into your graveyard, rest back on top in any order, then draw a card. So you can dump a card into your graveyard and pick up another one, or you can dump both of them into your graveyard if you'd rather do that, and just draw the third card. So not actually bad. Again, I really like this for decks that need to escape or reanimate or flash something back, or decks that care about having instants and sorceries in your graveyard, because this could theoretically put 3 in there all at one time, and that's not too bad either. Just a cool little card, you know. I think that when compared to strategic planning, even though it does lose, 1 dig's worth of card, I think it's probably still way better because I'm a fan of instant speed. But now let's go ahead and get into all that Lorehold stuff that we saw from today, and it's all mostly decent, but there is some stuff that's just okay in draft, I guess. So let's kind of fly through that real quick, looking at Ageless Guardian, Beaming Defiance, and Dueling Coach first. Now, Ageless Guardian is just a 2 mana 1/4 Spirit Soldier, and that's literally all it does, so I'm going to move on. Beaming Defiance is a Blossoming Defense that costs twice as much mana because it's white. So that's what that is. It's literally the exact same text box. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, gains hexproof until end of turn. And it's instant speed. Problem is it costs 2 and not just 1. So yeah, you want Blossoming Defense, it's going to cost you if you want to play it in this set. But it's still like a playable limited combat trick, I guess. Dueling Coach is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 2/2 human monk. When it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. You can pay 4 and a white and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. That was a lot of +1/+1s all in the same sentence. It's fun. It's alliterative. Everybody likes alliteration. So this is just kind of bread and butter, limited uncommon role player and aggro decks. Gives you a little bit of a mana sink, a late game plan, grow your board state, break through stalls. Always a fan of cards like this, but probably wouldn't play more than a copy or 2 in a lot of my limited decks. So up next, let's take a look at Returned Pastcaller, Stonebound Mentor, and Thunderous Orator. Pastcaller is 6 mana, 3, a red, a white, and Boros hybrid colors. The casting cost looks really weird on the card. For a 4/2 Spirit Cleric with flying. And when it ETBs, you return target Spirit, Instant, or Sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, at 6 mana, this is well priced out of standard playability, especially considering it dies to like Shock and Stomp, and that's really not what you want out of a 6 drop, but at least it replaces itself with one of many different kinds of cards. I mean, it almost says return target thing. Like, return target anything from your graveyard to your hand. But of course, you can't get like creatures, enchantments, and artifacts. So this is definitely not Eternal Witness, but it is on a pretty decent body, especially for the limited environment. So I might play 1 copy of this in the sort of mid-rangey Boros deck that it looks like Wizards wants us to play. But I'll move on to Stonebound Mentor. This is 3 mana for a 3/3 Spirit Advisor. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, scry 1. So on stats alone, a 3 mana 3/3 is at least fine and limited. But what I really like about this is that it's kind of a signpost. It tells us that this time around Boros is a little bit different. We're not necessarily an aggro color. Instead, we're going to be doing something slightly innovative with Boros. It's not really a color pie break because White's been playing around in the graveyard since the beginning of the game. So don't worry about color pie breaks. White does that. At the same time, it fits the archaeology flavor of this guild really, really well, and I like that. So it looks like, the Boros guild this time around, the Red-White guild, is going to have a lot to do with graveyard shenanigans, and I am a huge fan of that, especially the implications of it for standard Red-White or Jeskai decks, or especially Mardu Reanimator decks. I'm into all of these implications, so I love that this isn't just your standard cut-and-dried Boros is the aggro guild take on Red and White this time around. I love that they're doing something different, even if I don't love this card. Definitely won't see any standard play at the very least. I do like the implications of a card like this for the themes in the set. But anyway, the rant over. Let's move on to Thunderous Order, which is actually possibly standard playable, y'all, and I'm not even lying. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 core wizard with vigilance. When it attacks, it gains flying until end of turn if you control a flyer. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, and Trample, kid. So that actually is better than you think for a couple of reasons. I pointed out the other day that we got a 1-drop wizard in white, which is really good for the party decks. This is also really good for the party decks. White didn't have a whole lot of main deckable wizards to play around with, and now it's got 2 decently deckable, wizards that can play on both turn 1 and turn 2. And this, again, better than you think. You've got Selfless Savior to give creatures indestructible, which also gives this indestructible. You've got Halvar and Core Blade Master to give creatures double strike if they don't already have it, or you can just play Fencing Ace. But you've got Halvar that's already in these decks to give creatures double strike if they're wearing equipment. At that point, this will get double strike. If a creature's wearing a Maul of the Skyclaves, it has flying in first strike, meaning this will get flying in first strike. If you have, say, a Speaker of the Heavens wearing a Maul of the Skyclaves, that's pretty good right there. This gets like 3 keyword abilities plus the vigilance it already had. So that's pretty decent. Any creature with lifelink. Let's say you have a Shadow Spear on a creature. Well, this gains, let's say you have a Shadow Spear and a Halvar out. All right? The Shadow Spear is on a creature. In that case, this gains double strike, lifelink, I mean to say. Lifelink, trample, and double strike. Because of the Halvar. So that seems good. There's just a whole lot of setups, and you're gonna play Speaker of the Heavens. You're gonna play Maul of the Skyclaves. You're gonna play Halvar anyway. So as a 2-drop, this actually doesn't look as bad as you might think, because there's a lot of cards you're going to be playing around it regardless of whether you play this card. There's going to be a lot of cards you play around it that work really well with it. So I like it in Party, and I like it sort of along those mono white aggro already has tons of keyword abilities lines. So I kind of like this card more than I probably should. But let's take a look at Illustrious Historian and Relic Sloth. Relic Sloth is just a 5-mana 4/4 beast with Vigilance and Menace, and that's all it does. So I'm not super impressed by this or anything, but you might play one copy again in the kind of mid-rangey Boros deck that it looks like Wizards wants in draft. But Illustrious Historian is a little bit more interesting. It's 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/1 human shaman. You can pay 5 and exile it from your graveyard to create a tapped 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Really cool. I don't think it's going anywhere in Standard anytime soon or anything like that. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 1 or 2 of, especially after rotation in a mono red aggro deck, because I like these 2-drops that have relevance later on in the game, and this actually upgrades later in the game once you have enough mana to do so. But really, this is just more gas for limited. I play my 2-drop, I trade with something, and then later in the game, I get a 3/2. That is either going to trade with something or maybe start attacking once I've established control. So just a really, really cool card right here, and a really innovative way of thinking, how can red mess around in the graveyard to go with this Lorehold theme? And I think that this is a good way of sort of solving that design problem too. So big fan of this card, especially again in the limited environment, where I do think it's a pretty impactful card. But up next, let's look at Heated Debate and Lorehold Pledge Mage. Now, Debate is pretty straightforward. Just 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant that can't be countered, and it deals 4 damage to a creature or a planeswalker. So maybe you play this in the sideboard against rogues or other decks that you can use it profitably against. I mean, it doesn't really kill a Yorion. That kind of sucks. It doesn't kill a Lovestruck Beast, which also sucks. But, again, against these tempo decks that do play counterspells and small-ish creatures, this seems all right, but I don't think it's really going to see too much standard play, all things considered. I do think you play every copy of it you get in limited if you're playing red, because it's pretty solid removal there, but I'm not sure it breaks out of that environment. Lorehold Pledge Mage is one of these pseudo-prowess creatures we've been seeing. It's 3 mana, 1 and 2 Boros colors for a 2/2 core shaman with first strike. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, the Magecraft ability, Lorehold Pledge Mage gets +1/+0 till end of turn. So it does kind of suck. This is +1/+0, but that is massively offset by the fact that it has first strike, an ability that no one takes seriously enough. First strike is very good. This is going to kill other 3-drop 2 toughness creatures fairly easily, and even trade up with some of the 4-drops we've seen so far. So, we just saw a 4/2 4-drop or 6-drop, but that one had flying. But still, this will trade up a lot of the time, especially if you can, throw in a combat trick, because this is going to get whatever the combat trick gives it if you target it with the combat trick, plus the +1/+0. So you get fairly big off of this, but this kind of pseudo-prowess just isn't that impressive to me. But that said, probably bread and butter, role-playing, common and limited. If you're going to build an aggressive Boros deck, this is the way to go. But let's kick things up just a little bit in the playability department. I would say it's time for that. But that doesn't mean we have to stop talking about commons and uncommons. So we got some really good ones today, like Thrilling Discovery, for instance. Boros colors are red and a white for a sorcery. You gain 2 life. Then you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw 3 cards. So Cathartic Reunion, that gains you 2 life, that's where the white and the casting cost comes from. The difference is that you don't have to discard the cards as an additional cost to cast it, so you won't get blown out by a counterspell. That said, it's not as good for copying, and it looks like there will be some ways to copy spells in this set. We've already seen a couple, but hopefully there's some really good ones. But in any case, you won't get blown. You can't copy it so easily, or you can't copy it profitably like you can these other cards like Cathartic Reunion. So like there's pluses and there's minuses to it, but I do like the gaining 2 life, and there's going to be multiple ways to leverage that into other benefits in the standard environment. So I really like, again, that this could go in like a Mardu deck. It's a way to pitch cards while gaining some life, keeping you in the game against these aggro decks to get to the proper turns, get a little bit deeper into the game with that life game. So, and again, there's ways that, life game procs and triggers a bunch of stuff in standard right now. So I kind of like all this incidental life game we're seeing on a couple of cards today. And honestly, the Cathartic Reunion part of it is really good, because I absolutely hate getting my reunion countered. Here's another cool common from today, Lorehold Campus. This is just a land that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for red or white. So it's a red-white guild gate, but you can also pump 4 of mana of any color into it and tap it to scry 1. So you get kind of a Castle Vantress in your Boros deck, which I think might actually really matter once Castle Vantress is no longer an option. It rotates out of standard in the fall. That might be cool, but even right now, in a control deck or, grindier kind of deck in red and white that doesn't play blue, again, Mardu comes to mind. Scrying 1 as a mana sink when you got nothing better to do on your opponent's end step seems great. It's not quite drawing a card or anything, but it really does help. A color combination that doesn't usually get to draw cards, doesn't get to, not flood out. How do I want to put that? A color combination that cares greatly about its draw step, right? Because it doesn't have a whole lot of ways of restocking or anything. A card like this is actually really cool because it makes sure you blow past land pockets and useless cards and stuff. And that is very necessary, not only for some standard decks, but especially commander decks, which I imagine will play this card. Now, we got a few more uncommons to look at before we really get to the rares, but again, that doesn't mean they're bad. The uncommons are really sweet today, like Lorehold Excavation and Quintorius Field Historian. Now, Excavation looks really, really neat. This is 2 mana, a Boros colors, red and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, mill a card. If a land was milled this way, you gain 1 life. Otherwise, Excavation deals 1 damage to each opponent. You can pay 5 and exile a creature card from your graveyard to create a tapped 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So, nice little late game creature factory / mana sink right there if you drew dead for the turn or you drew a land or whatever. And this looks pretty good if you need to spend 5 mana. You can do it EOT or something and just go ahead and untap that creature immediately on your turn if you do it at your opponent's end step. So that's cool. I like the flavor here. Again, not necessarily a color pie break, as weird as it is to see mill a card on a Boros card. White's been playing around in the graveyard for a while, and this really fits the archaeology theme. Pretty obviously. So I like it. I think it might be a cool little commander card or something, but all things considered, unless you have a way to proc something off of this life gain, it's probably not amazing, especially to skip a turn playing this card at some point in the game. It's probably not absolutely incredible, right? And, I guess for aggro decks, this is some form of late game reach, but it takes 3 turns to deal 3 damage, and often it's going to take 6 or 7 turns to deal 3 damage. So I don't know if it's actually as good as all that, but I think it's a really interesting card nonetheless. But we'll move on to Quintorius Field Historian. This is the uncommon legendary student for Lorehold. It turns out that every school is going to have one of these. And for Lorehold, we get Quintorius, who looks awesome. This is 5 mana, 3 a red and a white for a 2/4 legendary elephant creature, or elephant cleric. Spirits you control get +1/+0. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So there's a card we'll talk about a little bit later that I think kind of combos pretty well with this because it gives all of your spirits haste and stuff. So, if you just combine this with a Tormod's Crypt or something and exile your own graveyard, well, that does in fact count as cards leaving your graveyard. Did you know that? It does. So you're just going to get a whole bunch of spirits. If you mill yourself or something, turns out Boros has ways of doing that. Turns out Boros has ways of doing that in this format. But, again, you could use black in your deck and play, various things that mill yourself. You play blue in your deck and play various things that mill yourself. And in that case, at some point in the game, you could just exile your entire graveyard with a crypt and swing with 1,000,000. That seems, I want to play that deck very badly. I want to play this in Brawl. I want to play this in Commander. I really, really like this guy. Now, we got to see a bunch of new lessons today, and some of us were worried the lessons wouldn't be strong enough. Others were worried they might be too strong. And one of those groups' fears have been put to rest, where the others have been fully realized, because I think that lessons actually do look pretty good. It looks like we're going to get a cycle of lessons in each, color combination, one from each color in that combination at every rarity. At least that's what it's looking like to me if all the other colors follow the same pattern as Lorehold, and I imagine they will. So let's start by looking at some common and uncommon lessons, why don't we? Spirit Summoning and Reduce to Memory. Now, Spirit Summoning is just 3 mana, 1 in Boros colors, for a lesson that creates a 3/2 red and white spirit creature. Now, that's not bad. It's really not. I mean, a lesson that creates a body is actually kind of good. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So in Best of 1, where you can wish for it, it's actually not terrible when you think about it, but it's nothing to write home about. It's just a solid card. Now, Reduced to Memory, on the other hand, is 3 mana, 1 and 2 white for a lesson that exiles target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Big deal. Now, sometimes I guess you can upgrade your own stuff with this, but you're not going to be doing that, especially considering you can't do it at instant speed. It's a sorcery. Your opponent casts a Heartless Act on a creature, you can't turn it into a 3/2, which kind of sucks. But at the same time, if you cast this on your opponent's, literally any problem permanent they might have on the battlefield, then getting a 3/2 is probably not that big of a deal, especially depending on what you have on the battlefield. You're not that worried about it. You're a lot less worried about the 3/2 than you are the Ugin or whatever, So just having access to this in your sideboard at pretty much 0 opportunity cost in the main deck, I think is a huge deal. Big fan of this. I think it's easily the best wish we've seen so far, and possibly the best wish we'll see all day. But there are a couple of more, because now we get to talk about rare cards, and I might as well segue into the rare cards with the rare wishes from today. We got to see Illuminate History as well as Academic Probation. Now, both of these do look okay. Illuminate History is 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a lesson. It's a sorcery. Discard any number of lessons, or discard any number of cards. Where's my brain? Then draw that many cards. It's a wheel effect. Then, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So, against rogues, you're always going to get a body out of this. But hey, for 4 mana, this plus a body some of the time is really good. And obviously, it facilitates itself helping you get a body out of it. So that's actually not terrible, again, especially considering there's 0 op cost to this whatsoever. It just goes into your sideboard. The only opportunity cost is slots in your sideboard, and especially in Best of 1, that's not going to make that much of a difference. In draft, you might just end up wanting to draft all the lessons you can possibly draft, because any card you didn't use in your main deck is effectively in your sideboard. You can wish for it. So, just start picking up a bunch of lessons toward the end of the draft, and this would be a good one to pick up too. Maybe pitch the last 2 cards in your hand and try to draw into some real gas or something, get a body out of the deal. It all sounds good to me, especially considering, again, this isn't one of your 60 cards. I love what Wizards has been doing with deck building lately. I hate to geek out a little bit here, but MDFCs, we have lands that are also spells. We have spells that are also creatures. MDFCs are amazing. They make up for a lot of opportunity cost problems in deck building, and these are kind of the same way. Deck building is on a more complex level than it's been in a while, thanks to MDFCs and now thanks to these. Deck building is relatively complex compared to what it normally is in Standard because of this, and I love that sort of complication. It's another layer on the onion, and I'm a big fan of that as a deck builder at heart, so I just want to say I love sort of the complexity inherent in stuff like this. But moving on. Monologue done. Let's look at Academic Probation, which reminds me a bit of Abeyance from back in the day. And that was a good card. A lot of people are calling this card crap. I like it. It's 2 mana, 1 and a white for a sorcery. It's a lesson. Choose one. Choose a non-land card name. Opponents can't cast spells with a chosen name until your next turn. Or choose target non-land permanent. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So you detain that creature. If you remember that old Azorius ability from back in the day, you can detain a creature for a turn, which isn't too bad if you're looking to get through and not be hit. Target your opponent's Lovestruck Beast. It can't block this turn, and it can't attack next turn. Doesn't seem too bad if you're just trying to push through damage and not die on the crackback. It's not terrible. One turn. This is tempo. Tempo matters greatly, especially just for 2 mana. Altogether, I think this is a really cool card to have access to in the sideboard. Keeps your opponent off of Ugin the Spirit Dragon for a turn. Keeps your opponent off of Genesis Ultimatum, Emergent Ultimatum, Yorion. There's a ton of stuff that this effectively stops for a turn, and sometimes a turn is all mono white aggro needs to win the game. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw this pop up as at least a one of in a bunch of sideboards in Best of 1. But now that we're in the rares, we can look at a couple of wacky cards that I don't think will affect Standard too much. But nonetheless, I think are really cool cards I can't wait to brew with. Like Ifrit Flame Painter as well as Radiant Skull Wielder. We'll talk about both of these because they're both kind of janky rares that are build arounds. Flame Painter is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 1/4 for each shaman with double strike. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Now this has double strike, meaning that if it gets through for combat damage, it's going to cast 2 spells out of your graveyard, which is unbelievable, right? It's bolt proof, frostbite proof. It's a lot of things proof, actually. It's glass casket proof. You know, there's a lot of cool things about this card that I really, really like. And so it's somewhat likely to stay on the battlefield, but that doesn't mean it's likely to get combat damage. You know, I don't like creatures that don't have a real effect on the table the turn they come into play. I don't like creatures that have to get through for combat damage, even when they do have double strike. So there are some things I just legit do not like about this card, and I don't think it's really destined for too much play. But at the same time, throw a Maul of the Skyclaves on it or something like that, and give it trample or something and just 1 or 2 extra power. And then suddenly, it's almost guaranteed to cast something out of your yard, and there's no restrictions on it. You can dump an Alrund's Epiphany in there and cast it. You can, dump or cast even a Genesis Ultimatum or an Emergent Ultimatum or something like this, any ultimatum, and then recast it out of your graveyard when you get through for combat damage. That's just a sick ability, especially, again, if you double strike with this and cast 2 spells. This could end the game pretty easily, but it's priced very, very highly, and you have to wait a turn for it to work, and it has to hit. And that is just too many and ifs for me a lot of the time. But I will try this in some sort of janky pile to cast, 7 and 8 mana spells. Don't worry, we'll do it on stream. But the same thing goes with Radiant Squirrel Wielder. I expect you'll see this card on stream a bunch, but I don't expect to see it in too many top 8s. It's 4 mana, 2 a red and a white for a 2/4 Dwarf Cleric. Instant and sorcery spells you control have Lifelink, Baby, Firesong, and Sunspeaker ability. That's pretty cool. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard. You may cast it this turn. If a spell cast this way, it would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. So this looks, on the surface, like Boros card advantage. I get to play a spell from my graveyard every turn. The thing is, it's at random, and those words are terrible. I absolutely have to kill that thing this turn or I die. So I'm really hoping I hit the removal spell. Well, I kind of lost the coin flip and hit the card draw spell. Or that would kind of suck. But I imagine the spells that you're playing in your deck, you want to play, right? So if you have to choose between, or not choose, but if you get a choice between, a random choice between 3 cards that are in your graveyard, chances are you'll want to play one of them again. But there are going to be feel bads where you actually do roll around to your next turn and this is still on the table. Your opponent couldn't find a way to kill it. You're super excited. And then you hit a frostbite when your opponent doesn't have any creatures. That is the suck. So I'm not super excited about this card, but I do think there are a lot of fun implications for it. And I really like the idea on a couple of these cards, like the last card and this one, of reanimator decks, reanimation decks that effectively play, spells as their reanimated pieces instead of a huge creature. Now, we've seen decks like this before, but just not as often as we see decks that want to quote-unquote reanimate creatures. We just don't see a whole lot of decks that quote-unquote reanimate spells. So I kind of like the idea here. I really do. But you still have to pay the mana to cast the spell. It might be a bad spell because at random are the 2 worst words to be on a Magic card in any text box. So I just hate the words at random. But honestly, I also think it's a little bit too expensive and has kind of bad stats for what it is. But that said, it looks really fun. And fun's what matters. Let's look at the crap rare of the day, and that is Sparring Regimen. At least I think it is. This card could be way better than I think, but it's 3 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment, and when it ETBs, you learn. That's probably good. Whenever you attack, you put a +1/+1 counter on an attacking creature and untap it. So give it pseudo-vigilance and make it a little bit bigger. So that actually isn't terrible, but it doesn't really materially affect the board state the turn that you play it. I guess it affects the game state, but it doesn't put an extra thing on the board aside from an enchantment. It feels like a do-nothing, but it does draw a card from your sideboard or rummage, drop a card in your graveyard and draw a card. That's pretty good too. I like that this is effectively a mono white card that acts the same way that like a Tormenting Voice does or any other card that lets us drop stuff into our yard for later reanimation or escaping. White doesn't get a whole lot of cards like that. So I do like these mono white cards that have learn. Absolutely do. So I think that's really, really cool, but ultimately I'm not sure how great this particular card is. So I'll move on to Hoffrey Ghostforge. This is 5 mana, 3, a white, and a red for a 4/5 legendary dwarf cleric. And this goes pretty well with the elephant from earlier. Spirits you control get +1/+1 and have trample and haste. There it is, baby. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. And it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to your graveyard, which I think is actually really, really cool. You know, we've got a couple of 4-mana things like this right now. Luminous Broodmoth, Nightmare Shepherd. This costs a mana extra, and those cards don't see a whole lot of play. So I'm not really sure how much play this ends up seeing. That said, unlike a card like Nightmare Shepherd, at least once you exile the creature, once the token leaves the battlefield, the creature goes back into your graveyard for further reanimation, which is actually a really sweet part of this card. But what I want to do is, again, play the Elephant, play Tormod's Crypt, have this guy out, exile my entire graveyard, get a whole bunch of, 5-power guys after all the anthems are applied, and swing in with haste. That's the dream I want to live, and I'm going to live it on stream over and over. I promise you, we're going to make this deck. I'm super excited about it, but it has to be a pinch faster than I expect it to be, because this is a very slow effect, and you have to play 2 5-drops in your deck and hit both of them, have both of them on the table at the same time. So it's not a great proposition. I guess you could play First Day of Class. Is that what it's called? The 2-mana thing that also gives all your creatures haste. You play that with the Elephant, and that seems like it'd be pretty good. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. As far as 5-mana commanders go, this looks really cool in Brawl, has a lot of fun implications in that format. And even just commander at large, I could see this being a pretty well-liked commander. But from here on out, ladies and gentlemen, is the really, really good stuff. That's this. From this point forward, we will be getting into super playable cards. Just to let you know. So let's take a look at Reconstruct History and Rip Apart. Both, you may notice, are uncommons. Now, Rip Apart we talked about on stream last night, but I want to reiterate some of these points here. It's a red and a white for a sorcery. Choose one. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or you destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now, my take on this on stream is that this kind of says destroy target non-land permanent in Boros colors for just 2 mana, but obviously if the creature's too big, it doesn't kill it. It won't kill most planeswalkers. Although the take I've been hearing all day on this is that it'll never kill planeswalkers, because a planeswalker has to minus first. Planeswalkers minus all the time, guys. Have you played Magic? Planeswalkers minus constantly. So like this could kill a planeswalker from time to time, but it won't super often. However, this is a main deckable, 1 or 2 of. I don't think you play 4 of this card, but it's a main deckable 1 or 2 of, something like that effectively allows you to deal with anything in game 1, theoretically. So I really like that about the card. The spread of options are enormous on this, and versatility is king. The problem is that it's a sorcery, and I think that does hurt the card a lot. You know, it's not quite a Braid or anything. A Braid can't hit enchantments. But a Braid was instant speed, which counted for an awful lot. The fact that this is sorcery is, make no mistake, the suck. But at the same time, I do think it's a playable card in standard and historic and possibly even as far back as modern. I think this card could have some playability even at sorcery speed because the range of targets are just so huge. But now we look at Reconstruct History, one of my favorite cards of the whole day. I don't care if it's uncommon. It's probably a commander staple from here on out, honestly. 4 mana, 2, a red and a white for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target artifact, an enchantment, an instant, a sorcery, and a planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand and exile Reconstruct History. Now, all of those are up 2s. Just so you know, you can get 2 out of 5 of those things. But on occasion, very, very, not often at all, this will draw you 5 cards in Boros colors, but that's not the point. The point is that for 4 mana, again, in red and white on the commander table, you can probably draw 2 or 3 off of this. If that's all you do, it's really good. It's really good if you're drawing 3 for 4. It's Harmonize in Boros. Look at it that way. Harmonize in Boros is a pretty sweet proposition, so I expect this to see a fair amount of commander play, if nothing else. I don't know if this sees a whole lot of standard play, but, again, in the kind of deck that could like an effect like this, that plays a lot of different types, maybe a Yorion deck that plays 80 cards and does play a lot of types. You play Maze Mind Tome and a bunch of enchantments, a few creatures, some instants, some sorceries. I mean, Yorion decks literally do have a little bit of everything. So in Jeskai Yorion or something like that, I could see a card like this kind of working out. You probably want Showdown of the Skalds more, though, all things considered, but still, you're drawing a buttload of cards off of this card, effectively. Even if you only draw 2 or 3, I think it's worth the 4 mana rate. Sorcery speed, again, kind of sucks, but you just don't see the ability to do this in Boros very often, so I'm excited about this card. But let's check out Semester's End here. I will never understand why this isn't the last card of spoiler season. I figured they would have left this for the last day, but oh well. It's 4 mana, wasted opportunity. 3 and a white for an instant. Exile any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers you control. Oh boy, at the beginning of the next end step, return each of them to the battlefield under its owner's control. Each of them enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, and an additional loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker. Waka Waka seems great. Sucks that we're going to have Yorion after Yorion rotates, but this doesn't come on a body. And it also doesn't flicker enchantments or artifacts. And I think that's a big deal, you know. Yorion flickering Omen of the Sea and Binding the Old Gods and Showdown of the Skalds and a couple of other cards has been important this season. You know, Treacherous Blessing, stuff like that. So, Elspeth's Nightmare. I could keep going. The fact that Yorion blinks enchantments is enormous, so this isn't quite that, but it is instant speed and it costs less mana and it can save your creatures from a sweeper effect, like a Shadow's Verdict or something, even if you're on the draw. So all of that seems really good. I feel like as a card that saves your whole mono white team from a sweeper, it's probably more going to be used in a sideboard capacity. When you know for a fact you're going to be on the play in game 2 or 3, this may come in as like Extinction Event Protection or something like that. But, you know, in aggro, I don't think it does as much as a lot of people say it does. People are excited because this is sweeper protection. But more often than not, I think this is going to be used in current day Yorion decks at instant speed to blink your Yorion and a bunch of other stuff. Yorion comes back and blinks some stuff. So it's going to be pretty silly in those decks because it's instant speed. But once Yorion rotates, we may see a new type of Yorion deck. You know, this goes pretty well with a card like Glorious Protector and a bunch of other stuff. So I like this card quite a whole heck of a lot. Let me just put it that way. But I'm not sure what really happens with it until Yorion rotates. But once it does, I think we start seeing a more sort of control-y version. You know, a deck that operates, and even though Yorion's already control-y, but we start seeing a more traditionally kind of draw-go, play spells on your opponent's turn, blink deck, likely because of this card. But all this is speculation right now. I think Yorion's just the better card, and this may not even pop up in Yorion decks for now. But once Yorion rotates, we'll probably be seeing a fair bit of this. So let's move on to Venerable Warsinger. Talked a long time on Twitch about this card, and I'm still about 50-50 on it, but I think I'm pushing 60-40 now in a positive direction. This is 3 mana, 1 a red and a white for a 3/3 Spirit Cleric with Vigilance and Trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature card with converted mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of damage Venerable Warsinger dealt to that player. A couple of cool things about this. Now, just in a vacuum, it's a 3 mana 3/3 with 2 keyword abilities, and one of those keyword abilities helps it get in for combat damage so it can actually proc. And all of that's pretty good, but I'm not super impressed by most creatures that are just 3 mana 3/3s. That's actually not that impressive of a stat line in a world with Lovestruck Beast. I'm also not super impressed by creatures that have to hit for combat damage. I'm not super impressed by creatures that have to wait a turn to attack in the first place. Usually, I just wouldn't love a card like this, but you know, I told Chad it reminds me of Isarath the Awakener. I couldn't remember the name of the card, but Chat came through on that. Thank you, Strictly Squad, for being there. Remembering Isarath's name. But this kind of reminds me of Isarath a little bit. I think it's way better than Isarath in a lot of ways, but it's still reminiscent in that it has to wait a turn. It's a 3 mana 3/3. It reanimates creatures out of your graveyard when you swing in. You have to deal combat damage, all that. Very similar card in a lot of ways. Isarath did nothing for all the reasons I've already outlined why I don't like cards like this. That said, we're not in a vacuum, and this isn't the same format that Isarath was in. We have so many support cards to go around this, so I think it might be really good. You know, first of all, for the Jank Lords out there, Mardu Clerics might actually be a deck that has the Cleric creature type, and if you get back like an Archfiend's Vessel after having only done 1 trample damage with this, so you got a 5/5 flyer. That seems good. So Mardu Clerics, I want to get that out of the way. More likely, though, this is good in decks that play Selfless Savior, all Seed of Life's Bounty, you know, cards that can keep it on the battlefield until it can swing in. If you sacrifice a Selfless Savior to give this indestructible during combat, you can just get the Selfless Savior right back after this does some combat damage. So that seems like a pretty cool idea. Same goes with All Seed, by the way. You can get back Luminarch Aspirant with this and start putting more counters on things in subsequent combat steps. We have Maul of the Skyclaves in Standard right now. If you stick a Maul to this, it's ridiculous. You know, you give it Evasion, First Strike, Trample, 5 power in total, so it's probably going to be getting through for some combat damage and getting back almost whatever you want at that point. You get back a Goldspan Dragon, you know, in some cases. if you throw them all the Skyclaves on this. You know, so I think there's so many like support cards that this goes well with at the moment that it might actually have a shadow of a chance at seeing some amount of play. That said, I think most of the things this card does, Lurrus probably just does better. So there's also that to consider. At the end of the day, again, I think I'm 60-40 on this card in a positive direction. I want it to do something in standard. I like that if it hits clean, it can get another copy of itself back. That's something I haven't mentioned yet that might actually be really, important. It's a must-answer threat. If your opponent hits a sweeper and then you throw this on the table, it must be dealt with before your opponent, lets it attack. Lets it deal combat damage. It's got to be dealt with. Your opponent has to have more removal or you're just going to start restocking with it. So there are a lot of really cool things I like about this. I think it's a must-answer threat, but that said, I also think it's a fairly easy-to-answer threat, so I have my doubts. But up next, let's look at PVDDR, Paolo Vitor Demodorosa's card, Elite Spellbinder. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/1 human cleric with flying. When it enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it. A spell cast this way, however, costs 2 more to cast. Not bad at all. Keep your opponent off of them sweepers, that extinction event on turn 3. Even if you're on the draw, you can keep your opponent off that extinction event for a couple of turns. This has evasion and a relatively fat body, I guess. It gets in for 3 damage somewhat reliably. Wears them all. The Skyclaves nicely. Even if it does die, the card stays exiled, which I think is really, really important. And yeah, your opponent can play it, but again, keeping them off of not just a sweeper, but like a 7-drop or 5. Keep them off of Ugin for a couple of turns. Keep them off of an ultimatum for 2 turns against Sultai. Keep them off of a Yorion that's in their hand, or a Tybalt that's in their hand, or something like that. There are a lot of relatively expensive cards in Standard right now that already take long enough to get to, and this card can pluck them right out of your opponent's hand, and even if they deal with this card, they still have to wait a couple of turns, possibly more, to get the lands to cast the spell that you got out of their hand. So I think this is actually really important. I love that it also gives you a look at your opponent's hand, apart from the card that you took out of it, to help you formulate your plan, see what their plan is against you. I think that's an undervalued thing, looking at someone's hand, especially in an aggro deck. So I just like everything about this. I think this is kind of pushed to the moon while still being fair. But it's a card that we're going to be seeing a lot of over the next couple of years because it's going to go in multiple decks. Mark my word. This is one of the best cards of the day easily. Now, we don't have a whole lot of cards left today. We are getting down to some of my favorite cards from today's dump, starting with Strict Proctor right here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/3 Spirit Cleric with flying. Whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2. So really interesting. This is slightly more expansive than the Hushbringer ability, while also having an extra toughness, which I kind of like. Plus, another thing that I like about it is that it's got the right creature type. Now, this just doesn't stop completely ETB triggers the way Hushbringer does, so it's technically a powered down version of Hushbringer. Doesn't have the lifelink, but I think not dying to cards like Stomp and Shock does make a huge difference. I think the Cleric creature type may make somewhat of a difference in the upcoming Standard, right? So, big fan of this. We effectively get to keep a quote-unquote fixed, if you want to call it that, a fixed version of Hushbringer after Hushbringer rotates in the fall, so that's kind of cool. I think these kind of cards need to exist in most environments, so I'm happy that we're getting this. There's a lot that I like about it, so it's really all I can say. I love these kind of taxation cards, and this one is pretty decent for the body, or at least for the casting cost. So 2 mana, 1/3 flyer that has this ability, I'll totally take it. That means that for a while, even if they somehow, like, Hushbringer gets banned, we'll still be able to play, like, Kroxa on turn 3 after we play this, and not have to sacrifice our Kroxa. Seems pretty dope. That trick still works with this card, too. Now you effectively have 8 Hushbringers in your Kroxa deck if you want to play that deck. So there's that, too. There's so many cool things about this card, and I'm a big fan. But now let's check out Blade Historian, the next to last card of the day here. This is 4 mana. All 4 of them Boros hybrids. You can play it mono red or mono white if you want to. It's a 2/3 human cleric, again that creature type. Attacking creatures you control have double strike. That's nuts. That's nutso. I mean, I don't know if in mono red it's better than Torbrand, but it probably is better than Torbrand with like an Anax or something. But, probably just play Cleave. instead of that. But in any case, this could go in mono red, especially after rotation. But I do like it in mono white too. The only problem is that you probably have to come down on the number of copies of Faceless Haven that you're playing if you want to play this card on turn 4 reliably. A lot of mono red decks, and even some of the mono white decks, have cut some copies of Haven. You know, there's a mono red deck that 7-2'd the other week. It's like 2 weeks ago. It's 7-2'd the Kaldheim 5K championship qualifier. And that deck had one Faceless Haven in it. One. So the number of Faceless Havens are being cut. So I think you might be able to fit both of them into the deck if you only played 1 or 2 Havens. But that's neither here nor there. Well, I guess it is here and there. It's something that has to be talked about, but I shouldn't waste too much time on it. So there's a lot about this card that I like, you know. This is just, it affects the board the turn that it comes down, right? If you curved out up until then and kept those creatures out, then this basically threatens Alpha Strike fairly easily on the turn that you play it. It's good on subsequent turns too. It might be decent in the Cleric's deck. It's a great hit off of Winota. If you have a Winota out and you hit on this, suddenly all your dudes that are attacking have double strike. All of this is just ridiculous. Like, the card does so many cool things in so many cool decks. You know, whether it's Boros, Mono Red, Mono White, Clerics, or Winota, or something else. The card has something to do, and you might be able to make an argument that this card slots into more decks on day one than any card that we've seen so far in this whole set preview. So I like this card a lot, and I think it's destined to see play somewhere. I know it's fragile to cards like Frostbite and whatnot, but I don't think it's going to stop it from doing something in some decks someday. But last card of the day, everybody. Let's look at Velomachus Lorehold right here. 7 mana, 5, a red and a white for a 5/5 legendary Elder Dragon with flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever it attacks, you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may just cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to Lorehold's power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. All right, so sign me up for this, dude, because I've been looking for a great reanimation target in Standard for a while now, and we have a couple, but none anywhere near as good looking, to me at least, as this guy. You know, it's a 5/5, decent stats, with flying and haste, so the moment you reanimate it, it gets to swing in, and when you do that, you get a 7-card dig to play whatever instant or sorcery you want, provided it's, 5 casting costs or less. However, I guess if you want to, you could find ways to boost this guy's power, swing in, cast ultimatums off the top. That's entirely possible, but, even if you're doing it quote-unquote fairly, and you can only cast 5 drops or under with this thing when you swing in, that's still unbelievable. You might hit another reanimation spell. Reanimate another creature from your yard, have a dude untapped, ready for the crackback. You might be able to get a removal spell out of your graveyard. Kill one of their, not out of your graveyard, but off the top 7 of your library, I mean to say. And, hit their best creature on the other side of the table. Keep your gold span from blocking or something like that, There's just a lot of really cool stuff that this can hit. 7 cards is a massive dig. And as a reanimation target, again, I'll say it, I think this is easily the best one. In Standard, if you're looking to cast a, revive that guy, bring that guy back from the graveyard spell. I think this is just far and away your best option, especially in a deck that features a fair number of instants and sorceries. I just love this thing to death, and I'm going to be trying to make it work day one. I don't want to hard cast it. I don't want to have to hard cast it, but in case I guess 7 mana isn't too much nowadays, is it? You could hard cast this, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to do it. I'll be reanimating this during the literal first day of Standard, so get ready for that. I'm excited about this card, much more so than I was about the other Elder Dragon we've seen so far. I like the sort of fair design of these Elder Dragons, more fair than we probably imagined, but I like fair design. And this is somewhat fair, but when you do bust it, it's incredibly busted, and I want to live that life. That is it. That is all the Lorehold cards from today, and a couple of extras for you there, just for good measure. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know how you feel about all these down there in the comments section, the old sideboard down there. If I missed any takes or interactions or anything like that, just the biggest combo in the world, make sure you let everybody in on it down there. This is an important time to put all of our heads together during spoiler season, Aside from that, if you want to watch me either play Magic or talk more spoilers, I do that on Twitch. We had a great time talking spoilers the other night. What's up, Strictly Squad? I see you out there. You can try twitch.tv/SVMTGDev, or you can hit the link in the description to check that out. Follow me over there for more stuff. Aside from that, if you want to support the channel directly, you can do that. Link in the description goes to patreon.com/SVMTG. $1 a month is all I require of you, and that'll let you vote on what decks you want to do all next season during Strixhaven, especially the first few decks that we do during spoiler season. You want to influence that. So if you feel like voting, $1 is all it takes, and I'm worth it. I think so, at least. Aside from that, I guess I'm done for this one. So again, just let me know how you felt about it, how you feeling about Strixhaven so far, because I was already feeling pretty good about it, to be honest, but seeing that we're doing like one school per day and seeing like what they did with the Boros Guild this time around, I'm very excited about it, if you can't tell. So I can't wait to see more from the set. I'm liking it so far. Just let me know how you feel about it, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.